Hi, and good evening, everyone. So, thank you for um, joining us tonight in this month's Cypress IO PH User Group Meetup. So, just a reminder that this session will be recorded. And we're also live in YouTube. We also have a Slido for our questions and some polls later. So, I'm your host for tonight. I'm Richmond. I'm currently a creative team lead in Cambridge University Press and Assessment. So I've been working in the software industry since 2010, and I started as a developer and now as QA. So I write about testing and development in writtenandtested.com, and do find me and connect with me in LinkedIn. So before we start with our talk tonight, we're going to do something in Slido. So if you could go to our Slido. I will share the link. We'll share the link as well. Oops, sorry. Okay, so first question, maybe we'll give you a minute to answer this. So we're curious what is the total number of years in testing experience, maybe not just Cypress, but in your overall testing experience. There's 6. How about the others? We're curious to know how long have you been testing? Six, there's 10, there's 3. Okay, a few more seconds for the others. Okay, so far, the highest is 10. Okay, moving on to, there's 2. Thank you for the answers. So moving on to our next poll, another minute for this. We're curious, how would you rate your hub experience in Cypress? So we'd like to know if you're just a beginner in Cypress, some experience, so advanced, and maybe you're one of the expert, and you can talk in this meetup in our in our next sessions. So yeah, we'd like to frame how to go with this event based on your experience in Cypress as well. So far, I think there are 6 who answered beginner. Give it a few more seconds for the other participants to answer. And if you can access also Slido, I'll send the link here. Ooh, there's a brave one. So we're now seeing maybe one expert and most are rating themselves as beginner. Couple more seconds for this question before we proceed to the next. Okay. So opening the next poll, we're curious as well as to what are your expectations from today's session. So our session is about model-based testing, but we're curious as well what are other expectations you have. So let's see what we have from our audience. Giving it a few more seconds. Any brave souls out there would like to share their thoughts? Okay. No one? No brave souls? But just to start, maybe for me, I'd rate myself still as a beginner in Cypress. So yeah, I'm curious as to how can I approach Cypress with different models. So there's one, how to write Cypress test faster, techniques as well. Yes, that would be good to know. And of course, there's also those who want to know what is model-based testing and other best practices. Keep them coming, guys. And finally, for our last poll before we start, we're also curious what you want to learn about Cypress in the future. So maybe we can set up our future sessions to what you really want to know. So from my end, maybe I'm also looking forward in like best practices in migration from one framework to Cypress. I think that would be a helpful topic personally. So yeah, we also have framework structure and also organizing test suites and page objects.
We'll see how we minimize test maintenance when a change is made between versions of an application, and we'll show how modeling ensures that every Cypress test comes with the accurate data that it needs. After that, we'll hop into a live demo where we'll show you hands-on how visual modeling transforms delivery practices beyond test design and maintenance. You will discover how personas like system designers, developers, and QA teams can collaborate seamlessly from the central point of truth, or these visual requirements models that we have in Test Modeler. We'll see then how non-coders can generate tests and data from those visual models, which is reusing existing code from Cypress frameworks that your skilled automation engineers may have already written. We'll also see how engineers can waste no time copying and pasting updating code snippets, focusing mainly on scripts for new and interesting logic. And finally, we'll demonstrate how developers and QA teams can work fully in parallel to develop from accurate specifications and test in sprint. So a short agenda for today's session. First, I'm going to discuss some of the main barriers to successful adoption of test automation within sprint teams and organizations. Then I will cover how model-based testing principles can help with these problems with a focus on Cypress. Next, you will see how these principles are implemented in a short live demo. And finally, we'll leave time for any questions that you may have. So, some barriers to successful test automation. The first point here, automation test creation remains wholly manual because there's simply never enough time. Teams of testers can often take days to create automated tests, which is obviously not the optimal way to do things and adds a lot more costs to the project and a lot more wasted time. Manual test case design cannot achieve sufficient coverage for complex systems, which can leave potentially critical functionality untested. Again, that can lead to costly bugs being introduced into the system that can damage the reputation of your software. Number 3, test data destabilizes automation and creates bottlenecks as teams cannot search, manage, or generate data fast enough for their test automation. Number 4, brittle tests need manual maintenance before every release, something that is not always accurate and takes too long. 5, automation code might not be easily reusable, creating that wasted effort and overworking a team of skilled engineers who have to pick up a lot of the work when it comes to creating test automation. These are some of the barriers that Curiosity team members have come across pretty frequently in our work, and it's something that we've seen in a lot of the market research as well, the relevant industry research in the last few years, like from the continuous testing report and from the world quality report as well. So another serious problem that we see is how to deal with change in your application. So let's imagine that we're halfway through a sprint and the new functionality needs to be completed before the end of the sprint to meet any budget or time expectations that has been placed on that project. However, there was an issue with one of the previously defined requirements, and therefore we have a change request submitted by a business analyst via some kind of sprint planning tool. Team members can then discuss this new requirement via back channels, whether it be Slack messages, Skype messages, talking to each other in the office, until some code has been written, and those code changes are committed by developers to that test environment. At this point, there is often no mapping between the newly committed code and that initial change request. This makes life very, very difficult for the tester, who now has to attempt to understand and interpret what impacts the code change has had on essentially a maze of components. They have to come up with this using a combination of these ambiguous requirements documents and sort of existing knowledge of the system under test that they are relying on. Once they've attempted to understand the impact, which often that is very, very difficult to understand the impact and they can get it wrong, they then need to manually maintain tens or hundreds or thousands of automation scripts manually, negative effects overall. So if the tester cannot understand the change request, the tests aren't able to be tailored to test the most critical parts of the system, which can lead to bugs being introduced. They also aren't able to adjust test coverage to cover the impacted components of that change. And lastly, we come on to the time factor. If they are spending days and days manually updating test scripts, you might literally get to the point when you run out of time, and they might not be able to edit and run all of those tests that they need to before the end of the sprint. If they then decide to delay the release, that can have downstream financial and reputational impacts. So let's take a step back and have a think about the software development lifecycle and some of the challenges we see around it. So more often than not, BAs have to formulate these complex requirements and change requests in disparate, unconnected formats. Developers then have to come in and pick up those range of formats and try to understand what exactly should be built. QAs then have to come in and unsystematically create these high volume, low coverage tests that are actually based off of that sort of ambiguous requirement that may exist in some kind of other format. Then automation engineers have to come in and choose between creating new scripts for that new logic or maintaining existing code. Either way, they're all manual processes. So really, you get to the point is this actually agile testing or continuous testing, or are we just looking at mini waterfalls here? So that was sort of a why, what the problems are. Now we're going to talk about why model-based testing at Cypress. So Test Modeler is essentially a collaboration hub for all members of the software delivery lifecycle, with the model existing as the central point of truth, containing all of the critical business rules and transactions within the target system. It enables all members of the SDLC to collaborate from a central model of the system. Business analysts can design requirements models that can be used by developers when they are writing code. Then the testers can use those same models to generate optimized test cases and the required Cypress code. This approach provides clarity and allows users to work together on a common open testing platform to achieve the same end goal, which is delivering quality software with no bugs on time. So how does it work? Cross-functional teams can work to import a variety of different resources into Test Modeler. Those can be existing requirements documents from Jira. They could be, let's say, BPMN style models where we've actually sort of already begun to start to model out some of the behavior in the application. But it can also be something like scans, which is what we'll actually go through in the demo today. All of these can be curated to create essentially some living documentation that lives inside of Test Modeler. Once those models have been built, we can then come in and start to generate the minimum number later in the session. We can also find, make, or allocate any test data to those models, eventually allowing us to overlay the relevant Cypress code snippets and automation on top of your model to then be able to trigger any executions in Jenkins via perhaps a GitHub repository and pull back any run results into Test Modeler as well. So modeling solves several key challenges in automation adoption and helps remove some of the barriers that teams face. For example, modeling automates slow and repetitive test case creation. It minimizes manual rework when something changes in the system under test. The test case generation optimizes the generated test suites to ensure the right areas of the system are being tested and bugs are being caught earlier. It removes the previously discussed silos and mini waterfalls with the miscommunications that can occur when moving assets between formats. Essentially, everyone can collaborate from a centralized point of truth. And lastly, number 5, Cypress code reusability makes life much, much easier for test automation engineers, and using models allows testers to generate the required test data they need. Okay, so we're just going to run through how the principles of model-based testing can be implemented within a real sprint team using Cypress as the automation framework. So at the start of development, we have business analysts who create a sprint backlog with the user requirements in it. When these are ready, they can import their requirements into Test Modeler to create our dynamic requirements models to bring those written requirements to life. These requirements explain the functionality of an application fully in a way that is interpretable by all stakeholders, from the non-technical BAs to the highly technical developers. These dynamic models also become reusable components that really enhance the speed at which new requirements can be designed. Along with speed, another main goal through all this is to introduce quality, which means sorting out the requirements is a very, very high priority. With our model-based approach, stakeholders can understand the entire requirement, catch bugs earlier, and overlay better Cypress code on top of your models. Once we've created those models, before a line of code is even written, we can begin to generate test scenarios in Test Modeler, exporting them out to a range of test case management tools. Once ready, developers can pick up the models. The models are designed to be understood by everyone, regardless of their technical ability, allowing for better communication. The devs can then start to build the application based on the model that they've received from the BAs. They can then find or make any test data they need and allocate it to the model. Their code can then be committed into a test environment where we can now use the previously generated test scenarios to test against our definitions of done. Once the software exists, testers can come in to design some automation around it. In this case, we'll be talking about Cypress. That execution is ready to be executed within the required CI/CD pipeline, and the automation can be easily overlaid on top of your existing models, which means that you really cut down the amount of work needed to create a huge or a small test suite that is fully integrated with your Cypress framework. Whilst this is the logical last step, in a truly agile workflow, we really need to be able to adjust to absorb any reasonable changes to our requirements in sprint. This is really easily achieved with the model as the central point of truth. Any changes made to the requirement can be identified visually by the dev team so they can understand the impact and react accordingly. Okay, last slide. With modeling, test automation with Cypress becomes a largely automated process driven by the modeled system that mimics the real system under test. That means accurate regression tests can be executed in sprint. You can feed new code into your Cypress framework, and any generated code becomes reusable. And with modeling overall, you can focus on testing what's new and interesting in fast-changing systems. So now I've introduced some of the problems and our approach, I'm going to walk you through how this works. So let me just stop sharing my screen for 2 seconds and I will get everything up.
While George is setting up his screen, do ask your questions in our Slido. The link is shared in the chat.
Great, thanks, Richmond. Okay, so we are going to think about how we can build a model of this very, very nice and simple customer creation screen inside of this e-commerce website. So one of the accelerators that we have built to increase the speed at which you can build models is the Test Modeler scanner. This scanner sits on top of the web page like any other browser extension and can be found actually on the Chrome Web Store. What it allows you to do is come in and pick out separate regions inside your web page and pick out the interactable elements inside the web page. So what we've done here is just picked up the password field, the confirm passwords field, and the account creation button. If we come in and have a review of these items, you'll see that the scanner has picked out a number of XPaths and CSS selectors for that particular field. We've also assigned a confidence level. So a confidence level of 1 is essentially saying that, okay, Test Modeler thinks that this identifier is good. It's going to work with automation. So you can proceed with confidence. However, if we scroll down to some of these lower ones down here, you see we're picking up the area here, and it's been assigned with a confidence level of 0.2, which strikes me as saying, well, you probably shouldn't be using this identifier. It might not work with automation. And we've actually uploaded it with a warning as well, so that you can see it. As we save, we can then upload those actions into our workspace. Now, what comes through when we upload those actions? Essentially, we get two separate files. The first one here is really an object repository. So inside of here, you can see we have all of those elements on the screen that we picked out using the scanner. So we can come in, see, for example, this first name. We've picked out a whole load of different XPaths and CSS selectors that we want to use in our Cypress functions. Now, what comes through as well is something that we kind of call the implementation layer. This is what we actually use to overlay the automation on top of the model. So if we come and have a look at our go-to URL, you'll see that we've automatically assigned this navigation step, a really, really simple cy.visit function, and the relevant URL that we need to enter. We've also done that with these parameterized functions for entering first name. If we come in and have a look at the code, you'll see we're first getting that particular input field inside of the container that it lives in. And we're actually going to type a parameterized function here. So this is our first name parameter. And as we start to build out our models, essentially what you'll see is that we build out the different data journeys and data scenarios that we can push into directly into our Cypress code. Now, there are a good range of default sort of functions in Cypress that we've patched into Test Modeler. So you'll see we've also got the click along with an assertion as well. So for example, the URL should equal the URL of our target page. Another thing to note here is that these are completely editable functions. You can come in and add essentially any snippet of Cypress code that you want to use inside of a larger end-to-end test script. Once that code snippet has been added into Test Modeler, it rapidly increases the speed at which you can create those Cypress test scripts. Because, as you'll see in a minute, all we need to do is drag and drop or import these functions on top of our model canvas. Okay, so now we have our implementation there, and we have our pages. We now want to come in and build a model. So if we come into here and pick up our model here. So actually this model has been automatically created by the scanner, but you'll see in here, if we give this a nice rejig. So if we break it down a little bit, you'll see that for this particular snippet of logic, we have a number of associated steps. The first step is to navigate to our page. And if we have a look at the associated automation, you can see that we're picking up our go-to URL function. That was the one that's going to say, okay, cy.visit and visit the particular URL that we want to be on. Then moving on, we have a subset of logic here that is all about our first name field. So if we come in and have a look, you'll actually see that that parameterized function has been assigned to a data variable inside of Test Modeler. Now what we can do here is come in and start to describe and design some of the data that we need to push into our functions. So a good example here is for our first name variable, we've assigned it with our data generation function for creating a first name. These basically work in the same way as any other Excel function, in that whenever they are resolved, a new random and synthetic first name will be generated. Now that's for our valid path. However, for our invalid path, we just want to enter some special characters into our Cypress code because we are generating a negative test scenario. So you'll see that we've done pretty much the same thing for the rest of this model with our, see here for last name, as well as the password field as well. So this is sort of the end result, but I want to show you how we actually got here. So for this, I'm just going to come in, create a new model, and we're going to work to actually import some of those Cypress functions and any relevant data straight into that model. So the first step here is just to come in, drag over a start block. Then we want to come over to our Project Explorer and navigate into our Cypress project and pick out that implementation layer that I spoke about previously. Now, inside here, you'll see the range of functions that is available to us that we can come in and import onto our model. So if we think about how to build a test case, the first step is to navigate to our URL. So we come in and import that Cypress function to do that. Then the next step is to come in and enter a first name. When we click import, you'll see that we have automatically decomposed this piece of logic into 3 separate paths. We have our valid first name path with that data generation function, our empty first name, which is going to enter just an empty string, and our invalid first name, which is going to enter our special characters. These are driven by data rules. So essentially, you can come in and set up any data rule that you want. So you'll see we have a whole load preset for first name, last name, phone number. And actually, if we come in, you can see the rule here. If we have a first name, we want to import these three separate options, right, for the first name. These are incredibly powerful and allow you to move much, much faster when you're building out those reusable models. After the first name, it's very much the same thing for last name, where we're just continuing to import. We can come in, select our desired rules. So let's go and say username for our email. And you can see that very, very quickly, we begin to build this end-to-end flow inside a test model. Now, back to our completed model. What can we do with this? So there are a number of things we can do, but the first thing is to actually come in and start to generate some manual test cases. So to do this, we have a test generation profile inside of Test Modeler. I won't go into too much detail on this as it's not really Cypress focused, but essentially what this allows us to do is generate an optimized test suite, which means that we're not testing too much, we're not testing too little, we're in the Goldilocks range, we're just testing the right amount. So I'm going to come in here, generate our tests, and you'll see we've generated 6 or so paths through the system. Once we've generated these paths, we can then come in and generate the associated Cypress code. So I've clicked run, come into automation, selected our Cypress template, and hit execute. Now this job is going to go away and basically start to string together those Cypress functions that we've overlaid on top of our model. And eventually we get a little file here. And inside this file, we have each of our Cypress scripts that we've generated. So what do these look like? In the example I have here, you can see that we've generated this test script directly from test modeler. We are first visiting our URL. We're entering first name, last name, email, password, the same password, and then clicking on create an account. Now, you'll notice that our data generation functions have resolved here. So for example, we've created the first name Jamar and the last name Con. Every single time we generate that code, this piece of data will change. That's crucial for not running into test data stock issues, or basically just always being able to use rigorous and complete test data to run your Cypress tests with. Now, what does that look like when we run it? So I've literally just come in and imported that into our Cypress, Cypress runner here. And if we can come in and run that, that'll be great. Running it already. Okay. So you'll see that we've spun up this process. Our tests are loading. We've navigated to our screen, entered all of our data, clicked on create an account. And once that registration goes through, you'll see that we have our successful run here, where we've come in and signed up for this account service with that relevant data that we've generated as well. Okay, so now we have gone through the sort of end-to-end process. We've built a model, we've generated tests, we've generated Cypress scripts, and now we've executed those scripts. But what happens when something changes? Let's imagine we're moving from version 1 of the account creation screen to version 2. Perhaps in version 2, there is another piece of information that we need to enter onto our screen. Say, for example, middle name or a country of residence. That's very, very easy to import straight into Test Modeler. Once we have our model, all we need to do is come in and explain that change on top of this diagram. So, for example, let's say we want to come in and import a function for a country. So I'm just going to use our first name function just for this example. I can come in, select a data rule for country. Find it. I've lost country. Okay, we'll go for city instead. That's the one I can see. When we save this, you'll see that we've come in and imported that same subset of for city. All I need to do then is come in and say, okay, I want to now include that new logic inside of our system. And I can just come in and finish up this model as well. I can then come in, sort of relay it out. You'll see that we've also assigned these city functions as well, with empty and invalid combinations as well. All I need to do then, click the button to regenerate the tests. And that change has now been incorporated inside of our newly generated test suite. Then all I need to do then is come in, hit run, and trigger the automation. And you'll see we get 6 new automation scripts in our Cypress language. Okay, so hopefully that made a little bit of sense in, well, firstly, how model-based testing works in general. Hopefully, the person who wanted to learn how to write Cypress tests quicker will have seen that this approach actually accelerates it to the extent where you're never really going to be manually scripting. ever again. And you'll see actually how well Test Modeler integrates with Cypress. To be honest, it's the one automation framework that we have seen crop up more than any other. Many of our actually recent implementations of Test Modeler have been all around using a predefined Cypress framework. Okay, so that was the demo. I'm wondering if anyone put any questions, or I'll pass back over to Richmond and say something.
Yep, there are questions here in Slido. Let me share my screen as well to share these questions. Okay, can you now see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the first question here: can Test Modeler integrate with Git? So maybe something about versioning.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. So actually, that's probably the sort of the source control that we integrate with the most. Actually, the most recent implementation I've been involved with, we were setting up a GitLab connector inside Test Modeler. What that lets you do is base hub repository, and then that can get picked up by whatever pipeline that you have set up to go in and actually execute that test as well. So short answer is yes, it is probably our the most used integration actually that people who use Test Modeler use.
Okay. Next question here: are assertions or checks available in Test Modeler?
Yeah, 100%. So in terms of Cypress assertions, we saw actually a quick example there with asserting a URL, where we're actually checking that the current URL is equal to the expected URL. But really, there's no limit to what kind of Cypress function that you want to import. So if you have some kind of really complex assertion, that's absolutely fine. All you need to do is just add that into its own function inside Test Modeler. And then you can use that to create scripts that include that assertion as well.
Okay. Thanks, George. Next question: can we use Cypress dashboard with the Test Modeler?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess that kind of feeds into the question about Git, in that it's all about setting up that pipeline that you might have. So say, okay, we're generating scripts from Test Modeler, and those are automatically getting pushed into our Cypress framework via a GitHub connector. Then you need to define, for example, where those Cypress tests are actually going to be executed. And at that point, you can use the Cypress dashboards to check those run results, rerun them if you need to, and generally just make sure it's all synchronized up with what you're expecting.
Okay. Next question here: so how can we create comprehensive end-to-end Cypress scripts where we are interacting with multiple screens?
Yeah, good question. Actually, I can probably share my screen for this one, Richmond.
Sure.
I'll actually show something. So let me come in. Yeah, we'll go here. So obviously the scenario that we ran through was quite a small scenario, in that we only really tested one screen. However, if we have a system that has multiple screens, and we're navigating through a larger end-to-end flow, we obviously need to come up with something to facilitate that. So what we have in Test Modeler is the concept of a subflow. A subflow allows you to embed other pieces of logic or other models inside of a larger end-to-end model. So you'll see here that we're actually embedding these managed categories models inside of sort of a master model. If we wanted to then assign some Cypress automation to this, that would be absolutely fine. We would then probably end up generating a much, much larger test suite, and your Cypress code would probably be hundreds and hundreds of lines long. However, that is so much easier with Test Modeler, because instead of having to manually write all that, it's all handled by the model, and it's all handled by the functions that you've dropped onto the model as well. Okay, that was that one. Do you want to take your screen back?
Yep. Let me share the screen again. So one last question in Slido. So guys, if you still have questions, feel free to add them as well. So how about if we want to set coding standards? I think that this pertains to maybe the Cypress code.
Yeah, really, really interesting question. So yeah, I guess with Test Modeler, we give you the platform to define your coding standards yourself. All of the Cypress functions that we create are built off templates. So you can come in and define any template that you want. So if you have a particular standard, you can implement that all the way through your workspace. So it means that you don't have like 5 different team members coding Cypress scripts in 5 different ways, because that gets confusing. People start asking, well, why are you doing it like this when I'm doing it like this? Not really what you want to be doing. The automation generation, I guess, system inside Test Modeler does, because all it takes is 1 or 2 automation engineers to set up some of the functions that you want to use, and then absolutely everyone can use that same function. So that really just allows you to standardize the Cypress scripts that you're generating, and allows you to implement those coding standards.
Yeah, and this made me think as well about some like static check tools. Can you integrate Test Modeler with static check tools, maybe like SonarQube or other static check tools that are checking the standards?
So I imagine we would be able to. That's a good question, actually. I haven't come across that personally myself. I'm pretty sure we have in the past. Yeah, I'm not sure. Sorry, that's a bit of a bad answer, that
one. Yeah, but it's interesting to find.
Yeah.
And, so that's our question. That's our question. So if you still have questions, please do ask them. I have another one here. Yeah, earlier you mentioned about dealing with multiple screens, right? So I'm curious if, well, given that maybe the Cypress code is complex more than the one that you shared. So I'm curious how can Test Modeler deal with more complex Cypress code?
Yeah, so I guess it's all down to how complex you want it to be. So what we have is the ability to create a library of functions inside Test Modeler. Once you've built that library of functions, you can use those wherever you want. So you can come in and have one function that is incredibly complex and it tests, and it's all about, it might be asserting a row in a table, for example. It's all about being able to if you can create those functions for yourself, we can insert those into Test Modeler, and they can be then used to create much, much more complex scripts. Because obviously what we were just doing, Cypress get and then Cypress send keys or type, which is really, really simple, but it's quite a good example for, I guess, sort of beginners or first-time users. But if you're thinking of doing all sorts of fun stuff that you can do with Cypress, then yeah, absolutely, we more than recommend that you get those complex.
The minimum knowledge that we should have, that we should be knowledgeable of for us to try Test Modeler.
Yeah. So I guess the most success we've had is when you come in with an open mind in terms of sort of resetting some of your presumptions with coding, and focusing more on the benefits of using Test Modeler much faster. But to be honest, we have so much good training material. You can go in with zero knowledge of anything, and we have plenty of stuff that will help you get up to speed. But the best thing to do is come in with an open mind and try and start afresh and think of how you model sort of end-to-end logical flows. And that's the best way to get started and start your journey with Test Modeler.
Thanks for that, George. Any more last call for questions? So we don't have any more questions in Slido. You can also send your questions here in the chat if you'd like to. But I guess that's it for tonight. George, any final words, or where can people find you?
Yeah, let me just come in, share just so everyone can see this last bit. Yeah, so we can carry on the conversation. So we'd love to chat further. You can book a web meeting with me via a Calendly link. You can also, as we mentioned, visit Test Modeler for a free trial. And actually, I failed to mention, we have a free Cypress tutorial as well that you can use, which contains a demo Cypress framework that is available to be used with Test Modeler. There's also a good talk from one of our friends, Greg Sipholt, who we recently helped implement model-based testing and Test Modeler for Cypress. So if you're interested in hearing more about that, I'd really recommend following this link. And yeah, you can also email me at georgeblundell@curiosity.software if you want to carry on talking. But yeah, actually, let me put this link in the chat as well, because it's very interesting. I really would recommend anyone who's interested to have a look. There we go.
Thank you, George, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. So do try Test Modeler. Do reach out to George if you have questions, and yeah, explore Cypress from a model-based perspective. Thank you, George. Thank you, our participants. Thank you, Johnny, for hosting this, and have a good day ahead.
Thanks very much, Richmond. Thanks, Johnny. Thanks, guys. See you soon. Bye.